Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege for me to have the opportunity to participate in this open debate of the Security Council under the Italian presidency. The Security Council has been actively committed to this topic since the presidential declaration in December 2015 and subsequent reports of the Secretary General and resolutions. In the fulfillment of my mandate, I've reported twice to the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly on this subject, and recently I submitted a joint report with the Special Rapporteur on the sale and sexual exploitation of children, focused on children's vulnerabilities deriving from conflict. And indeed, I'm convinced that trafficking in persons in the context of conflict and post-conflict, trafficking of persons fleeing conflict, and the protection of the rights of victims and potential victims require urgent, concerted, and effective action. The shocking video disseminated a few days ago by CNN showing an auction of young migrants publicized as slave workforce and sold for a few dollars shows that trafficking for the purpose of exploitation and slavery is a tragic reality nowadays. And I would like to thank the Secretary General for his strong and inspiring words on this subject. Research carried out by UN agencies, including UNODC, IOM, UNHCR, and NGOs such as Caritas Internationalis, among others, confirmed that this human rights violation is a systematic component of conflict, amounting on certain circumstances to war crimes or crimes against humanity. Trafficking is always fueled by political instability and happens on a regular basis in the context of large migration flows. Moreover, as a form of gender-based violence, it disproportionately affects women and girls, especially for the purpose of sexual exploitation, and targets on a massive scale children and young adults. Egregious patterns of trafficking, forced labor, and slavery have been found to be a strategy for terrorist groups such as ISIL, Daesh, Boko Haram, and others. Furthermore, these gross human rights violations are systematically perpetrated in the context of any conflict or in areas at risk of conflict by criminal or armed groups which take advantage of the breakdown of the rule of law to carry out the dirty business of trafficking in persons and become more powerful and dangerous. This is one of the reasons why the prevention of trafficking for any purpose is directly linked with the maintenance of international peace and security. In this light, a human rights perspective is crucial. Human rights violations such as trafficking are not only a consequence, but also a cause of conflict, when they reach a massive dimension and amount to gross human rights violations and serious crimes perpetrated by criminal or armed groups, including in the context of migration and especially in transit countries. Therefore, the Security Council agenda on trafficking should be linked with the process leading with the Global Compact on Migration and Refugees, as well as the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Moreover, trafficking should be addressed in connection with the Women, Peace and Security Agenda and with the 6 grave violations against children during armed conflict agenda. In fact, a particular concern relates to the situation of children who are used as child soldiers or sexual slaves during conflict, are disproportionately affected by displacement, often are traveling alone to reach a safe country, and are subject to any form of trafficking, exploitation, and abuse. It is an obligation under international law to protect them at all times. In this context, the states should ban detention of children for violations of immigration laws and regulations. States are required by international law to take effective measures to ensure that victims of trafficking are protected from further exploitation and harm, including during conflict and humanitarian crisis. They also bear an obligation to prevent, respect, and fulfill the human rights of victims of trafficking, including by exercising their due diligence in holding non-state actors, including armed groups and criminal groups, accountable at all times. Moreover, an innovative approach is needed, based on good practices of some UN agencies, regarding early screening and identification, not only of victims of trafficking, but of people vulnerable to trafficking, among displaced populations, asylum seekers, and in general terms, people fleeing conflict, aim to adopt tailored solutions to protect vulnerable people from trafficking and exploitation. And I'm confident that this approach will be reflected in the new resolution that is going to be adopted later today. Mr. President, preventing and combating human trafficking cannot be achieved by one state alone. The lack of international cooperation is often the source of further human rights violations, especially in the context of migration. I would like to recall here the many who lost their lives in the attempt of reaching a safe shore in Europe and elsewhere, and the many surviving their perilous journey to end up in situations of trafficking for forced labor and slavery. States must respond quickly and effectively, adopting a shared responsibility approach to incorporate anti-trafficking in all humanitarian interventions in conflict zones as a life-saving activity, to establish wider channels for regular migration, to ensure full respect of the principle of non-refoulement, to implement relocations in a preferred country, family reunification procedures, effective child protection systems as a powerful means to prevent trafficking and simultaneously to ensure stability, peace, and security. Thank you for your attention.
I thank Ms. Giammarinaro for his briefing.